Hey, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. My name is Jess Neumann, and I am the Assistant Director of Academic Innovation at DU. I'd like to welcome you to today's Xplore workshop, which is hosted by Project Excite, the entrepreneurial hub at DU that supports undergraduate and graduate students. Xplore assists students who have an idea or an early stage company and want to validate their idea or continue growing an established venture. The program helps students to be successful, whether they continue with their current venture, start a new venture, or become innovators at other companies. In response to the COVID-19 crisis, we have opened all of our virtual workshops to the public for free. Today's topic is Advancing Innovation, How to Find Breakthrough Ideas, with DU's Director of Alumni Engagement and three-time alum, Brian Elizardi. Brian is passionate about reimagining the new frontier of work through activating communities, building craft experiences, and curating great stories for Denver professionals. Brian founded Pioneering Denver, a DU platform that takes the Denver community behind the scenes with entrepreneurs and community leaders and their stories of building a more inclusive, authentic, and vibrant Denver. He is also a longtime and beloved member of the DU community. Just a couple of housekeeping logistical things before we get started. Please feel free to ask questions via the Zoom chat function. We are recording today's session. If anyone needs to drop early, we will also share this session across our channels afterwards. And we are also, at this point, live broadcasting on YouTube. So with that, thank you for joining us. And Brian, take it away.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you so much for that nice introduction, and thank you all so much for being here for this presentation. So this is a topic that I'm really passionate about, and I think the timing for it is perfect. On any normal day, the pressure to innovate and to disrupt is ever increasing. I think we're all expected to come up with breakthrough ideas and to reimagine the work that we do for this modern workforce. And so I'm excited to kind of run you through just some of my own experience in this territory and share with you some of the lessons I've learned along the way, and then also ways that we can begin to kind of put some of these ideas into practice. So the emphasis will be on that last part, and being able to incorporate a couple of key mindsets into your practice. And I know this is the last workshop in the series, and so if you've had a chance to catch any of the workshops throughout the way, I think this is a nice capstone experience to take all of the information and all the learning and all of the new content that you've been getting and think about, how do I put this into a systematic approach to begin chipping away at my idea. And so if you are an individual entrepreneur, if you are someone that is within an organization, I think this is going to be perfect for you. So with that, it's the lunch hour, and we can't effectively talk about innovation without warming up our right brain. And if you're anything like me, during this time of day, this is kind of when nap time wants to set in. So what I want to do is try and get some creative juices flowing, and start off with what we call a right brain push-up. So getting that right hemisphere, which is really the center of where our creativity and our innovation comes from. Let's get that part warmed up. So if you could just plug in for me in the chat box. What holds you back in your own work from being innovative? Whether it's thinking about your work as a student, thinking about your job, maybe it's a side hustle, or it's something that you want to do, for a full-time gig. What are the things? What are the barriers that you often see when it comes to innovation? And these could be personal barriers. These could be organizational barriers. So go ahead and just take a moment to put in a couple ideas or some thoughts into the chat box. So taking a look here. So will it work? Fear of judgment, obligations that take time. That's a huge one. When am I going to find time to innovate on top of all my other daily obligations? Some of the most common ones that we see across the board here are, it's time consuming. That's something that that Liz mentioned. It's risky. It's expensive. It takes a lot to find breakthrough products or to find breakthrough ideas. Oftentimes we hear from folks that to be innovative, you have to be creative, and that's kind of a word that is has a lot of meaning to it. So oftentimes folks can maybe not see themselves as being creative. And then when it comes to kind of thinking about innovation in organizational context, oftentimes we have a perspective that change isn't good. What got us to where we are today is what's going to make us special and make us unique, and why break that? Why tinker with that? So be thinking about some of your own kind of personal barriers as we move throughout this, and kind of keep that in the front of your mindset. To kind of jumpstart us, I want to start off with a story, and some of my colleagues I know who are on the call right now are going to be familiar with this story because I love to share. But who knows what this is a picture of? Go ahead and put in the chat box if you have any guesses. I'll give you a hint. If you look closely at the sign, yes, it is the original McDonald's. And so this is actually a great story about innovation. If you go back to California in 1948, this is the very first McDonald's. And so we have the McDonald brothers who at the time noticed that there was an emerging culture in consumers' desires to be out of the home for dining experiences. And so they took that hunch, that sort of mystery, that observation that they were seeing, and they put it together quickly into a solution. And that's what became the first McDonald's. And so the solution for them was a quick service restaurant that had a very limited menu, one that gave consumers very few choices, but really allowed the organization, the restaurant, to excel at a couple of choices here. And that obviously we know kind of the future, and what comes after that is the next step for McDonald's was Ray Kroc. Ray Kroc picked up the baton and he popularized the assembly style chain of fast food restaurants that we know that permeates our culture today. And so it really was taking that experience that the McDonald brothers saw and beginning to turn it into this pattern, this formula that could be repeatable. And so getting down that production cycle time to as small as it can get, adding drive-through windows, adding all these different sort of efficiencies along the way, and then taking that model, and then what later became sort of the McDonald's franchise model, and turning that into what we now know as sort of the McDonald's algorithm, if you will. And so it's this combination of forces that has produced one of the largest corporations today. So if you begin to sort of peel back, that story, you start to notice there's a predictable pattern that is really behind any successful innovation and formula that's widely used today. And so, most innovations begin with a mystery. In the case of the McDonald brothers, they noticed that those consumer patterns were changing, and that majority of folks empowered by the ubiquity of cars began to have a mobile and an increasingly mobile lifestyle. And so how might they want to eat? How might their consumer patterns be adjusting to that? So they took that idea and they whittled it into what's known as a heuristic. And so for McDonald's, it's a quick service restaurant that had a very narrow menu. And it wasn't until Ray Kroc came along that they really figured out what is the ultimate formula, sometimes known as an algorithm, which is that assembly style menu that we know today that really permeates any fast food leisure restaurant. Think about Chipotle as a great example. The original Chipotle menu was completely binary, and so it was a series of binary choices, that allowed the chefs in the kitchen to maintain quality, but also allowed the consumer to move through very quickly. And so that's something that's very much ubiquitous when we think about sort of our lifestyle today. You can see this pattern reflected here in a number of current and progressive examples as well too. Think about a company like Airbnb, recently valued at $31 billion. That was obviously before coronavirus. But their model and their sort of idea was beginning to look at the mystery of how people's travel patterns were changing. And, you obviously know the founder story, the two original founders who, slept on an air mattress, and took that idea to think through, well, what if we opened up, all these unused bedrooms? And the first example, the first pilot for Airbnb was in 2008 during the Democratic National Convention right here in our own backyard, actually. So taking that mystery and willing it down into sort of a heuristic, which is letting homeowners sublet their spare bedrooms, and then ultimately settling in on their algorithm, which is this idea of collaborative consumption and the sharing economy. Another current example is a product that we all know and love, Instagram. And so, the founders of Instagram noticed, that our patterns, our behaviors were beginning to shift now that we all have these cameras in our own pockets. And so what was it about the ubiquity of those cameras that was sharing or reshaping the way that people were sharing their experiences and taking photos? And so, they started off with a simple experiment, which was a photo sharing app. But at the time, there were, a number of different photo sharing apps. So for them, the ultimate pivot point came when the idea of taking these poor quality photos that were shot on camera phones that, at the time were very low quality, but using the filters to make those photos seem elegant. And so now we have a massive network with photo sharing, and Instagram, obviously, as we know, has been bought out by Facebook. So kind of peeling back this model, we know this to be what we call the knowledge funnel. And the basic idea, in essence, is that every great innovation starts with a mystery. It starts with an idea, a concept, a hunch, something that that you want to explore. Maybe it could be something you're noticing in the marketplace, maybe something you're noticing in your own consumer behavior. It could also be identifying what those gaps are. When you think about a project or an idea that you're working on, if you're an Excite student, chances are you've already identified kind of what problem is you're trying to tackle, what you're trying to solve. And so over time, you begin to whittle that into an offering. It's a model. Oftentimes that will manifest as a prototype, an experiment, something that, is agile, is nimble. It gives you an opportunity to get that out into the marketplace, and then to gain real-time valuable insights and to get feedback on how people are using your product. And then from that feedback, either pivoting or dynamically steering into what ultimately becomes your reliable system for success. And that's what we know as sort of this algorithm. If you notice kind of the way the movement works within the knowledge funnel is that over time, as you move down the funnel, you gain efficiencies. And so that's when you start to, you spend less and less energy on the mystery, but more and more time on execution. And many startups, I think, mimic this process as well too. When you start to get to the algorithm phase is when you're starting to hire out a lot of marketing, a lot of support staff. You've really settled in on this is kind of what our bread and butter is. This is what is tested in the marketplace. This is what we know will get funded. This is what we know audiences will grapple with, or this is what we know will sort of stick, if you will, in the marketplace. And so over time, as you move through each phase, you shave off important time and energy, either individually or as an organization, that you can then reinvest back into the next mystery. And so this becomes sort of a virtuous cycle. And the most successful organizations are the ones that don't just settle on their individual algorithm, but the ones that are just constantly churning through this whole process, figuring out what's the next mystery for us to tackle, what's the next problem for us to solve. So with that in mind, what I want to do is just sort of equip you with a couple of mindsets that I have seen in my own experience and also in the research that I think lend themselves very nicely to how to produce this process, and whether that's just through your own thinking, if you're an individual that is expected to produce a body of work, or if you want to put a new idea out there, if you're an organization that's thinking about how do we revolutionize our offerings to be much more innovative and to capture a portion of the marketplace. So starting off is empathy. And so for me, empathy is, manifests as a deep sense of curiosity. And oftentimes one of the myths that we have around innovation is that it's a top-down approach. So an organization sort of comes from on high, or you have leaders that say, okay, we need to be innovative. And so everyone go and let's start being innovative. And, chances are you've been in a meeting like this one where the pressure is on to brainstorm or to come up with the next big innovative idea. And it almost feels like a forced process. I don't know about you, but this is definitely a reality that I think all of us are kind of subject to. Is we have this sort of edict that we have to be innovative, we have to be creative, but we aren't provided with the tools or with the necessary thought process to do that. So when you think about where to start, when it comes to innovation and creativity, ultimately for me, that comes back down to empathy. And so every great innovative product, every great idea that has ever gone to be successful has started with connecting with end users. And empathy is the core skill set, the core approach, and beginning to achieve that. I love this quote by Clayton Christensen, who recently passed away, former Harvard Business School professor. And he says that questions are places in your mind where answers fit. If you haven't asked the question, the answer has nowhere to go. It hits your mind and it bounces right off. You have to ask the question, you have to want to know in order to open up the space for answers to fit. And so having that spirit of openness, having that spirit of curiosity, I think is a great place to start. A great example of a couple of organizations that I think have really nailed this. Two that come to mind for me are organizations like Whole Foods and Four Seasons. And they have realized that for them to be successful as organizations, they have to get very close to their end users and very close to their employees and very close to the people that are on the front lines. Success for them is not a matter of, claiming that innovation needs to happen from on high, but as an organizational mandate. And so the organizational leaders are really encouraged and inspired to get on the ground floor and to engage with the mystery of how consumers are engaging with their products. And they use those ideas to come up with concrete ways to innovate. And so a classic example of this, I think, in action is an MRI machine. If you've ever had the misfortune of having to have an MRI, it can be very uncomfortable. And imagine what that feels like to a child, that has to go into a machine that, is by its very nature very claustrophobic, very loud. And so this is a great example of design thinking in practice. And so how might we design a better MRI experience for children? And so this is the pirate ship MRI. And so beginning to inject a note of whimsy into what it's otherwise a very painful, a very confusing, a very uncomfortable process. And so, it took the designers, it took the engineers, it took the doctors, it took them having to get into the mindset of the end user, which in this case was a child, to begin to understand how might we improve this experience? How might we make it better for the child to experience an MRI so that the pain or discomfort associated with their visit is less obtrusive, less traumatic. MRIs are an important tool, obviously, for a doctor. So, empathy is at the core of what this is all about. And that process of connecting with an end user is all about putting empathy into action. So first mindset is empathy. Second is going to be experimentation. And so, oftentimes another myth that we have when it comes to innovation is that every great idea starts with an effective business plan. And if you're anything like me, you've either experienced this in your own personal practice, that pressure to codify everything. I think this is especially prominent for students who are taught that to be successful in business, you have to have a plan. Oftentimes I think we socialize our students academically into this box that you have to sort of check off all the right boxes, you have to do all the theoretical work. And I think the reality is that when you reverse engineer a lot of the most successful products or ideas, some of the ones I've mentioned, success comes through experimentation. And so I think the reality is that innovation is often launched in miniature. And so, what we see when it comes to effective innovation is that, a majority of products either start off as experiments or ideas or pilots and curiosities. And so one of my favorite examples of this is organizations that empower this idea of experimental doodling. So Google is, I think, famous for this. They have their 20% rule, but they're not the only ones that I think have really sort of capitalized on this. And you have the marketing firm Maddox Douglas gives employees about 100 to 200 hours every year to work on projects that just purely interest them. So just empowering and equipping them with their own personal curiosity and working it into their workday. The sticky note, the post-it 3x3 post-it note, is a famous example of a product that was launched from 3M as a result of some experimental doodling. You've also got the consulting firm Bright House, which gives employees up to 5 what I call your days throughout the year. And those are just days where employees can reflect, they can free associate, they can begin to make connections in ways that often don't come naturally, I think, to us in our normal day-to-day lives. And the last one is Atlassian, and they formerly called it these FedEx days, but they've changed it to Ship It days. And so these are days dedicated throughout the year where the whole organization stops and they will prototype a product from start to finish. And they'll work together in teams. They'll distribute across different divisions, maybe that they don't normally do. And the basic idea is to take a product from its full life cycle from start to finish. Going back to Google, this is sort of the power of where this idea can come into effect. Google has this famous 20% rule, which is that 20% of your time can be dedicated to doodling, to exploring, to spending time on projects that may or may not be related to your direct job. And what's interesting to note about that is that many of those products actually go on to be some of the most successful ones at Google. And so you think about things like AdWords, you think about things like Gmail, those are all products that emerge from giving freedom and flexibility to Google employees to just to doodle and to experiment. So it doesn't have to be a full day, if you're thinking about this from a leadership perspective, but I think beginning to empower your employees to see those mysteries, to have their boots on the ground, to be out and to be curious, I think is a great way to start. One of my favorite examples from our own backyard is one of our alums that we work closely with is a guy named Ryan McLean. So Ryan graduated from university a couple of years ago and always had a passion for making pizzas, grew up in a family that just would do homemade pizzas. And he had this idea for a business, making and producing these pizzas for DU students. And so just out of his own rental house near campus, Ryan was able to start making pizzas and then actually started selling them directly to DU students. And they caught on like wildfire, so much so that the local news media came to Ryan and said, hey, we noticed that you're having a lot of success here and that folks love your pizzas and we'd love to interview for it. And the irony here is that in doing their due diligence, they actually uncovered that Ryan hadn't filed the necessary paperwork with the health and safety departments to effectively or to be able to run his business. So that obviously was the end of that particular concept, but Ryan took that idea back and he refined it and he put it into what is now known as Mountain Crust Catering. And we use them a lot for our different catering needs. He's taken this old 1950s Ford truck and he's turned it into this traveling brick oven. And anytime you see this car driving around town, that delicious pizza is ready to be had. He hosts upwards of 90 events a year. And Ryan is a very successful entrepreneur. And it didn't start with a business plan, but it started with putting that idea out there into practice, being willing to explore and being willing to experiment and kind of see what happens. And then he took all that data back and refined it into what is now a very effective business model. So I want to wrap up with the final mindset, and it's this idea of exploring. We talked about this idea as you move through the funnel, you start to gain efficiency as you move forward. And I think one of the myths when it comes to innovation is this idea that it's kind of the arrival fallacy, if you will. And so once you settle on your first breakthrough idea, once you figure it out, your work is done. It's like this idea that, there's nothing left to explore. We put it in the product, we put the product out in the marketplace, and now all we have to do is just sort of spin the flywheel, if you will. And the truth of the matter is that the marketplace is constantly changing underneath our feet. Consumer behaviors are constantly adapting. Organizations are constantly changing. We all know this very intimately right now because we're living through this pandemic, and very few people saw this coming. Very few people could see the full impact of this. And it has thrown, it's been a complete disrupting force, I would say, for all of business and all of industry. So, if you thought that you were done, if you thought that you'd arrived, there's always something around the corner that I think is going to change your reality. And so the truth about innovation is that it's a constant journey, and it's about continually re-engaging with the mystery of what the marketplace is experiencing, what individual consumers are seeing, and without having that deep sense of empathy, without experimenting, you're not going to be connected to the source of that innovation, that innovative energy, if you will. I see this a lot with organizations that have this mindset where they sort of think that they've arrived as an innovative organization. Is you start to get innovation bloat, as opposed to a traditional funnel, where you gain efficiencies throughout the process. What ends up happening is you settle on your breakthrough idea, and then you stop innovating. You stop paying attention to the mystery. And so it starts to bloat the organization. Going back to our original example of McDonald's, I think as much as we love to tout them as being one of the original innovators, McDonald's has actually been guilty of this from an organizational standpoint. If they had been effectively engaging with the mystery of consumer behavior, I think that they would have realized, some of the different trends around, healthy eating, around coffee, for example. And so you wouldn't see, popular chains as like Chipotle, or you wouldn't see Starbucks as much if McDonald's had been able to foresee those trends and to sort of hedge the additional, the oncoming competition as a result of that. So how do we get out of this mindset? One of my favorite ways is just this idea of divergent thinking. I think oftentimes when we settle on, a successful formula, we get stuck in execution mode. We're focused, we sort of know what our charge is, and we go to work every day trying to put that into process. And the truth is that this is actually kind of a cycle, and I love this model of divergent thinking, because what it does in essence is it says that, for success, you have to, as much as you have to zoom in on the idea or the product or the execution, you have to give yourself just as much freedom to zoom out and to unhook. One of my favorite things to do after one of our successful events, one of our successful initiatives is just to leave my computer at home and to go out and to explore the city. Grab a notebook, go to a coffee shop, walk around a new neighborhood, go to a museum, and really just start to engage the part of my cognitive thought process that starts to open up, starts to kind of see the world maybe for what it is, and to understand maybe how things have changed, and to get out of that need to constantly be turning and to constantly be focusing on execution, but to start to balance these two. And so I think this is a great place if you're ever kind of stuck, where you feel like you don't have time, you feel like you don't have the energy, you don't feel like you have the permission to be innovative. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just stop, whether it's just taking a sick day or taking a vacation day, or even just taking a day to break free from the routine and to start to see your work from a different altitude. Another great example, if you're sort of in an organization, is this very phrase, how might we? It by its very essence, I think it invites permission, it invites exploration. I think oftentimes when it comes to brainstorming and coming up with innovative ideas, we approach it from kind of an assembly line standpoint, where we have to kind of churn out the idea, we have to force it through, if you will. And great ideas and creativity and innovation comes from a sense of openness, and so this question I feel like is such a freeing one to ask in meetings and to ask in your organizations, and even just to ask for yourself, how might we better attract consumers in the marketplace? If you've got a particular idea or a product that you're looking to launch, start with this question, how might we, disrupt the marketplace as it relates to, mobile healthcare technology? So, and if you're a leader of an organization, I think that there's an opportunity here to create some enduring value. Your focus needs to be on, gaining and helping remove as much barriers as possible, so that the efficiency can be achieved through the innovative process, and so that information, resources, ideas, concepts are not getting stuck throughout the organization, but are really flowing very freely. And so continuing to drive down the cost, continuing to free up resources, continuing to bring together maybe teams that don't spend a lot of time together. I think these are all great ways that leaders can really begin to free up those resources and create that deep sense of efficiency throughout an organization. So 3 mindsets: empathize, experiment, and explore. I think this to me, I think is a great place to start, when it comes to beginning to innovate, beginning to think creatively, beginning to open yourself up to new ideas, no matter where you're at an organization or as an individual. Start thinking about some of the barriers that you have, and my experience, there's two types of barriers. There's the real barriers that exist, the ones that are foundational maybe to an organization. And so have conversations with your leadership, have conversations with your peers about what we can do to break free from those, and to kind of push through those so that we can free up resources, free up additional thinking. The second type of barrier I think is more personal, and that's the sort of mental barriers that we put up in our own minds. And so how can we begin to break down some of those barriers to see the world through new angles, to see product ideas maybe in a way that we hadn't seen them before, to combine, to mash up ideas from different areas and different industries and ways that we can begin to integrate into our own work. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pause, and that'll wrap up my formal part of the presentation, but I would love to pause for any questions. I think Jess is going to open up the line, and if we've got any chat box questions, I'll be happy to address those now. I see Jess has a question here. It says, can you provide an example from your own work where you navigated through these steps in order to successfully innovate? Yeah, so, majority of us here on the call are all, employees of higher education. And I think traditionally higher ed, is an organization that has proven itself to be very resilient. If you look at the University of Denver, for example, it's been around for over 150 years, and it's proven its ability to overcome, world wars. It's proven, that it can come back from market crashes. So I think there's a mindset within higher education that, if it isn't broken, then why sort of go trying to fix it? And I think, when it comes to our work in constituent engagement, so much of the future of engagement right now, I think, is being transformed through our very eyes. And so if we just sort of rest on, the traditional model of engagement, I think we'll miss a majority of the marketplace. I think the biggest disruptor in our work that we do with an advancement and with an alumni engagement was back in 2004, 2005, an organization called Facebook that got started and took our previous algorithm, which was the alumni directory, and it pretty much said that you no longer own the most up-to-date information on your alumni. And so, it's impossible to overstate the disruptive force that had on an industry at the time that was about 90 years old. Alumni engagement goes all the way back to the original secretaries, who wanted to keep track of where alumni were going as early as the 1910, 1920s. So, an example of kind of putting this into practice was the development of our Pioneer Endeavor program, and beginning to sense that the marketplace was shifting and that people were no longer gravitating towards the traditional things that universities were putting out there. You have, a classic example, I think, is the networking bar party. That is a heuristic, an algorithm that I've seen a number of universities sort of rest all their energy on. And so we knew that was no longer an effective way to engage individuals. And so, we put an experiment out there. We put an event out there that was sort of a new event, a new idea. It was based on a lot of the feedback that we were hearing, but also a lot of our hunches as an organization. And, based on the success of the first couple of events, we used that data to then to iterate, that model, and then, continue to advance that into what is now, I think one of the more fun programs that we get to run, and I think is the basis for a lot of the storytelling type of events that we do. Sure. So Kate is saying, can you talk about how the Crimson and Gold Trail came about? Where did the idea originate from? So, Crimson and Gold Trail was really the accumulation of all the stories that we were collecting. Alumni engagement today is a very relational business. We try and, I think, we try and reimagine our work as being, very outbound as opposed to traditional event planning. And so for me personally, when it came to developing Pioneer in Denver, a lot of our relationships we were developing, a lot of the folks that we were hearing from, were our business owners. And over time, we just noticed there was a unique cluster of individuals, who had graduated from the university who were very entrepreneurial. And I think it's a product of kind of our ethos, and so they were using their degrees to go out and hang their own shingle and to kind of put their leadership into practice through owning their own business. So, once we realized that there was, something there, we sort of combined that with a lot of the, what we noticed was engaging, from an event standpoint, and that was people really curious to find out and to uncover, who those alums were. And we have great stories of, people who would go out of their way to support alumni-owned coffee shops and restaurants. And, one of my favorites is an alum who works downtown who would drive all the way to Steam on Pearl Street, which is not convenient for downtown, but is close to campus because she knew that Hani was the alum there. So over time, we came to realize that it was kind of a 2X factor, So once you uncovered, who the individual was, and once you discovered that there was a relationship there with an alum, you were twice as likely to go support that place as opposed to other ones there too. So the trail really was just about how do we make that a forward-facing product, if you will. So taking all those relationships, taking all those ideas and those mysteries and putting it into really kind of a first version. Oftentimes you'll see this referred to as an MVP, a minimal viable product, and for us, we knew we wanted to make sure that was kind of a polished launch, that we nailed the aesthetics and that it was, had a great kind of user experience. So once we put that product out there and we kind of saw the way that people were engaging with it, we're taking that data now, and the next version of the trail will come out this fall, and we'll have to reflect some of the shifts in the marketplace. Obviously a lot has changed, and there are going to be many of our small businesses that may not come back, from this crisis. So thinking about how does that data, how does that input inform the way that we iterate the product. But ultimately for us, we knew we wanted to get something out there. It was an idea that we've been sitting on for years and years. And so I think we had a good degree of knowledge that it would be successful. And so, how do we get something out there in the marketplace? And then how do we let people provide us with feedback and, on what they're seeing, what they're hearing, and then using that then to continue to update the algorithm, if you will. Next question is, are there any innovative ideas you've seen that have come out of this uncertain time that you really like? I think there's a great body of research about great ideas that have been produced in times of crisis, we're starting to see a number of really unique, creative ideas that are emerging just from our own community. I think one of my favorites is going to be Noble Riot. And so I'm drawing a blank on the name of the alumni right now, but Noble Riot was a wine bar. And so the alum that started it, chime in if you guys can remember the name, because I'm drawing a complete blank right now. But in essence, it was a wine bar that was started in Rhino, and it had the misfortune of opening up in January and February. And as soon as it opened up, it was no longer relevant. The basic premise of a casual sit down, Nicole Mattson is the alumna. So the basic idea of people coming to sit down was just no longer relevant and no longer possible in the era of COVID. So Nicole quickly pivoted the concept into Noble Fright. And so they were able to use the kitchen to, in essence, start frying chicken and to turn it into a quick order restaurant, and very small menu and takeout options too. But one of my favorite parts about it is that they serve a daily soup, and you pay what you can pay. And so, it's a great way to, I think, pivot, in the, when the idea that you have wanted is no longer a reality, but you still believe in the marketplace. You have a community, you have an audience behind the work that you want to do. And, in times like this, I think like Nicole, it kind of forces you just to get a little more creative.
Thank you, Brian. It looks like we might be done with our Q&A at this point. So I just wanted to say thank you for providing such a wonderful final Explore workshop for all of us. And thank you to all of our attendees. We really appreciate you joining us. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us at projectexcite@du.edu. And if you weren't able to catch Brian's email before, we are happy to direct you to him. So be well and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.